There is much talk of imposter syndrome and how this holds us back from creating content or saying much of anything. I've looked at a number of videos on supposed imposter syndrome, and I find mass confusion on the topic. It strikes me, though, having studied this intensely and applying my own former training in electrical engineering and mathematics galore, but with no degrees per se in this, that I have the following ideas to put forth. I would say that I believe there are two types of imposter syndromes. The first type of imposter syndrome being those who, what you might say, lack self-trust, because especially they will say they're not trained professionals. Additionally, they may say that they just don't have much to say, perhaps because they feel they have less clarity on subjects than some people do, including topics in their own lives. Even though every person has a unique set of experiences in life which can be so fascinating and illuminating and helpful, just telling a story, let alone how much clarity you have as to what factors were involved when you may suffer or feel joy, how you interpret it, the clarity level being sometimes secondary to the experience itself, which can be quite varied from person to person and thus fascinating in and of itself. Now, the other type of imposter syndrome, I believe, exists, and all too frequently, is the type of person who senses deep down on some level, it may be quite buried, that they don't really know what they're talking about, or, in fact, that they are simply using what they say in a way to get something in a very short order, short-term expediency, you might call it, and thus pulling the wool over some people's eyes in a certain sort of sense. I would say this second type being imposter syndrome type 2, whereby these individuals are trying to use, consciously or unconsciously, some kind of gimmick in order to make it look to potential buyers, shall we say, that the quality of their product, whether a tangible one or an idea, is much better than it actually is, especially in the long term. So, for instance, the type 2 type of imposter syndromer, I would say, all too often may be trying to sell a product, so to speak, that is also quite lacking in clarity, but secondly, has unintended consequences, or at least hidden consequences, to the consumer who buys it or listens to it, that they wish they wouldn't have gotten later in time. You might say then it's kind of like buying a street drug that has been cut 5 or 10 times, adulterated, and has much harmful substances you didn't know when you bought it. You assumed, say, if you were a heroin user, that you were simply perhaps buying clean heroin, only it may have been cut several times or more and have many contaminating substances therein. And this then being something of the order of what is sometimes proffered or sold by the type 2 person, who I would say struggles also with imposter syndroming, that their product actually can have many harmful elements that don't show up till later. Kind of like that drug fen-phen for the heart. Or was it a diet pill. Now, this isn't to say all type 2 imposter syndromers who have a questionable product know about this. They may have simply been taught this in a college setting and are mimicking what they were taught. Or they may say that they don't have the time to track down all loose ends, all discrepancies that pop up in their mind at least, or even in literature, that they have a family to feed and raise and provide for in the manner appropriate, they would say. But at the same time, basically, they're being often a questionable product, and in the back of their mind, something just doesn't gel. And thus, even if they ostensibly have, on the surface, good intentions, something doesn't gel and they feel like an imposter to the extent they don't know on a conscious level whether their product is even helpful or rather harmful, actually, in the long run especially. To recap then, on this shorter than usual video, I would say I believe there are two types of imposter syndromers or syndromes. The first type is those who lack self-trust and put too much trust in others because they don't have, quote, training as per a college degree, especially at the PhD level or MD level. They may even feel that they're inappropriate to the knowledge because they're ugly of a sort. Maybe they feel that they don't know much also because they have a technical background and not a liberal arts background, or that they're socially inept. They may be tall, ectomorphic, and feel that they're a nerd and thus not a people person. And so who are they to communicate knowledge about people and how people can be helped? Who are they to claim they're empathetic if they have a body build that in some circles is considered anal, so to speak? This belying, of course, that many people who are quite beautiful and seemingly socially adept can use this all too often to be highly, highly manipulative, and thus not these social butterflies you might think, but instead highly adept at using this to, quote, use others. Putting the lie then to the whole thing or notion that ectomorphs who are tall and often obsessive-oriented don't know anything about people and have no empathy. If that were true, by the way, science fiction, including Star Trek, would have nothing to say when it actually has a lot to say about people. And secondly, this is a lie, so to speak, that one can put to the test by simply watching the wonderfully comical movie Sideways, which really was quite a hit when it came out. I'll finally end this by a wonderful book and audiobook. Around 1960 it came out. Dr. David Schwartz came out with a book, The Magic of Thinking Big. He was a professor down in Georgia and also did therapy. He had a degree at the PhD level in psychology. And he was a most unusual man, I believe. The title belies something sort of hokey, but actually it's quite a profound book. And he talked of how so many people put others up and themselves down. But he did not extend this then to discussing who is being put up so much more than others. In my view, my not having a college degree, but having 3 relatives who do have PhDs, I would say, I believe the people who are being put up by the type 1 imposter syndromer are precisely those who have terminal degrees from colleges, especially in the liberal arts, and thus claim they are trained professionals. In fact, a little tiny story is that a next-door neighbor of mine who has a degree in liberal arts once said 2 years ago to me that so-and-so is an armchair philosopher. And so there you have it. All too often, those without degrees, especially in the liberal arts, termed armchair this and armchair that, or amateurs, not trained professionals. And until we get to the bottom of this respectfully, the imposter syndrome or type 1, I believe, will continue and continue and continue all too often, with the adage basically that I'm not trained, so who am I to say anything? Neglecting even the fact that whatever is said is often going to be quite different than what someone else says, just by way of experiences being so different. From person to person, everybody has a different, unique set of experiences, and you don't have to have even great clarity or completeness of accuracy with regard to all your premises to have something to contribute. Milligan talks somewhat of this. I think his first name is Jonathan. And others who say, sing your song, basically. That's my thinking then.